Awesome. Thank you so much, Miles. So, hi, everyone. Again, thank you for joining us. It is awesome to have so many people so far here. My name is Vera. I am a sales rep here at Hospitable. I've been with Hospitable for 2 years now, which is almost half of my sales career. So, that tells you something. Essentially, my day to day is to help our hosts to understand what they need and to kind of see if it's going to be a fit with Hospitable. A bit about me. I usually travel during the summer and I hibernate during the winter. And I have a 6-month-old puppy that you guys might see on the screen. If you do, I am sorry, but she is still in that training mode. So apologies in advance. Brian?
Hey there. I'm Brian. I'm also a sales rep at Hospitable. I'm based in the US. I do not have a puppy. I've got a cat who's in the background, which is why I have this background on, because every now and again he likes to just jump up and say hi and make noise. But I'm also a host, so I've got 13 properties in Georgia. And that's kind of how I got my start with hosting and working at Hospitable. Been with the company for a little over a year and a few months. So just trying to, help everybody get acclimated to Hospitable, help people get up and running and figure out this whole hosting thing that we've decided to call our job, I guess, right? But for those who don't know what Hospitable is, we give short-term rental hosts their time back. So we're an automation tool that helps, the day-to-day operations of what we call our short-term rental business. So we founded in 2016. We try to make short-term hosting trivial for over 11,000 hosts worldwide. So we've got AI tools, automated messaging, automated task scheduling for your team, your cleaners, unified synchronized calendar to help prevent double bookings across Airbnb, VRBO, and Booking.com, and any direct bookings that you want to start taking through Hospitable. So that's a new feature we've got, which is pretty cool. Centralized inbox, so unified inbox for all those channels to see all your guest conversations, and then trying to manage everything in one place in one app. So we have an iPhone app and an Android app. So you get rid of the Airbnb, VRBO, Booking.com app on your phone. Just use Hospitable. You can go to hospitable.com to find out more. And that's pretty much everything for Hospitable. So we've got Avery today. Avery Carl is joining us. Avery's the founder of the Short Term Shop, the premier short-term rental acquisition company. She's a best-selling author and podcast host. She also uses Hospitable to help manage her short-term rentals. I actually bought your book this morning in prep. I didn't get it yet, of course, but I bought it this morning off Amazon. So you're welcome. You got my $15. You're welcome.
Thank you. My publisher got your $15.
True that. Very, very true. Avery's here today to share, her expertise and factors and to help grow her short-term rental business, so you can grow your own short-term rental business. So she's going to discuss how she went from one property to 250 in just over 5 years, just about 5 years.
5.5-ish.
Okay, cool. Well, Thanks for joining us, Avery. We really appreciate it. You mind telling us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. Thank you guys so much for having me. I am definitely a Hospitable super fan, so really happy to be here. So I personally own 250 doors, and we are gonna, I'm sure, get way in the weeds on that. I don't own only short-term rentals. I have a mix of short terms, long-term single family, and also long-term multifamily, so apartment buildings. So I'm not one of those short-term rental gurus that's going to tell you that short-term rentals are the right and only way, and there's nothing else worth investing in, because that's not true. I'm a big believer in a very diverse portfolio, having a little bit of everything. But I also believe that because the reason I was able to get from 0 to 250 so quickly was because 5 of my first 6 investments were short term. So I was able to kind of use those as a cash flow turbocharger to where I could take that and go buy more properties more quickly and scale faster, because I bought my short terms, most of them, first. So I think that short-term rentals are a very important part of any real estate portfolio. Maybe, even if you already own a bunch of long terms, having a portfolio of short terms within your larger real estate investing portfolio is really important, because they do just cash flow so much heavier. So you can, use that extra cash flow to, move around for whatever acquisitions that you want to make. I also run the short-term shop, which you guys may or may not be familiar with. Especially some of you guys that are overseas. So we are a real estate team, which is technically a brokerage within a brokerage. at EXP, and we are all real estate agents. We cover, I have 70 agents in 19 of the top short-term rental markets in the country. So if you want to buy a short-term rental, you come to us. We help you pick which market. We also teach you how to manage it for free, all while you're still under contract. So by the time you close, you know what you're doing and you're ready to just hit that button and go live, and you're not floundering around with an expensive property that you've just closed and you're like, now what do I do? So I also have my book, Short-Term Rental, Long-Term Wealth, and my podcast, The Short-Term Show. My husband also has a podcast called The Short-Term Rental Management Show, which focuses more on like the nuts and bolts of management, where he talks about Hospitable quite a bit, whereas mine is more on investor success stories. So I think that's pretty much covered everything.
Awesome. You do a lot. That is truly amazing to hear. And obviously, after everything you said, the main question is, how did you get into short-term rentals in the first place?
Okay, so that's a really great question. And I think also very relevant to now. So I bought my first short-term rental almost a decade ago. And so my story is a little different than a lot of the influencers out there who started buying in the last 2 or 3 years. So I started buying short-term rentals kind of by accident. My husband and I were moving from New York City to Nashville, Tennessee. And our real estate agent was really trying to get us to buy a house in this really hip, like fast appreciating part of Nashville called East Nashville. And we were like, no, thanks. If we're moving to Tennessee from New York, we are tired of neighbors. Let's buy something out in the country. So we ended up buying a house to live in out in the country, but we had a little money left over and we thought, well, what can we buy that's going to make us, what can we do with this? Like maybe we should buy one of those houses that she was talking about that it's worth so much money a few years later. Maybe we should buy one of those and rent it out. And when we have kids one day and they need to go to college, we can just sell it and pay for their college out of that appreciation rather than just coming out of our pockets, which is a terrible, terrible reason to invest in anything. That whole premise was stupid, but it's what we did. So we went and bought a house in East Nashville, right outside East Nashville. And we put it up for long-term rent, not short-term. And I was living the dream, working in the music business in Nashville as a marketing manager for a publishing company. I was making very little money. I was making $37,000 a year. And this house, after the mortgage, was making about $1,000 a month. So the mortgage was $650 a month. This was a long time ago. And it was we were renting it out for about $1,600 a month. So we're cash flowing $1,000 a month, which was about what my paycheck was after all the deductions and things. So we're like, wait a minute, we just bought this house that we just kind of had to get it ready and get it rented. And we have doubled my income. We need some more of these. So only then did we start educating ourselves on what real estate investing was. We didn't even know it was called real estate investing when we bought that first one. And we just had a little bit of money left. So we said, well, what can we buy next that's going to make us the most amount of money the fastest so we can buy more properties? And we said, well, how about a short-term rental? And we didn't want to do it in Nashville because Nashville is constantly changing the rules. And we just could not afford to buy something and then be told a few years later that we couldn't use it for that. And so this was 2015. And we had just been on vacation to the Smoky Mountains where we stayed in a cabin. Everybody else that was in the Smokies was staying in a cabin. There aren't really a lot of hotels there really. And we said, well, how about that? And at the time, there were not courses. There were not webinars on this. There were not gurus. There was barely AirDNA. And so we just bought one and kind of figured it out as we went. And back then in the Smokies, the average property management split for a short-term rental was 40% of your gross. And we were like, we cannot afford that, period. So we self-managed. We figured out how to self-manage remotely out of necessity because we're like, no, we need that 40% so we can go buy another one. We can't be just giving it to UncleRicky'sCabins.com for no reason. So we kind of just figured out how to self-manage remotely. And they're really a lot of the big property management software, if it did exist then, was very much in its infancy. So we did everything manually. I was looking at our Airbnb calendar at the beginning of every month and typing out what days my cleaner needed to go. It was Yes, like completely manual. So that's how we ended up doing it. And then we scaled that 1 into 5 in the Smokies over the course of about a year and a half. And the next thing that people usually say is, well, you can't buy that. That was, 8 years ago. You can't do that now in the Smokies. We can't in the Smokies. Yeah, I did pay $150 for a few of those properties, but there are other markets that you can, that are still $150,000. And then people's next thing is, well, they're not going to make as much money as they do in the Smokies. You're right, they won't, but my properties, when I bought them back then, did not make as much money as they do now. So for example, like I've got a couple 1-bedrooms with lofts that I rent as 2 bedrooms. Those, when I first bought them, 2016, made $45,000 a year. They now make $75,000, $80,000 a year, but there are totally markets where you can still go get a cheaper property that may not make as much as it's going to make in some of these blue chip markets like that, but it will make enough. So anyway, I'll let you guys ask the questions now.
Yeah, sure. I
Awesome.
appreciate that. Oh, sorry, Vera.
No, go ahead.
So you kind of touched on something which is interesting. So a lot of hosts, they kind of start off in their own backyard, which it sounds like what you did. And then they want to expand, like either, all across the country or, a little bit further footprint from where they are. So from Nashville to Smokies is a few-hour drive. Like, how did you get over the initial hurdle of trying to buy a property and managing it remote, which I feel like is a big deal breaker for a lot of like new hosts, especially?
Well, I will say, and I hate to be like back when I started, but it is a lot easier to do it now than it was then. And then it wasn't really even that hard. So you really just need 2 people to start out, your cleaner and like a handyman type person. And you can build out your more specialized vendors from there, like an HVAC tech or a roofer, or, anybody more specific that you need. But you really just need those 2 people. And back then we only had Airbnb and Vrbo, and we had to like manually sync the calendars, but we use Hospitable and Price Labs now. And there's really you definitely want to be able to check on your property once a year, just as a good practice. But the vast majority of people can't live, like not everyone can live in the best place to invest in terms of what their budget is or what the tourism's like, or, any number of things. So you really do just have to get comfortable with knowing that it's just a mindset shift. So if I live in Florida now, so if a toilet breaks in my house in Tennessee, the steps that I'm taking are the exact same as if a toilet breaks in the house that I live in. I don't fix toilets, so I'm not driving to any houses or going upstairs in my house and fixing a toilet. I don't know how to do that. Either way, I'm picking up the phone and calling somebody. So whether I'm calling somebody in Florida or I'm calling somebody in Tennessee, the process is the same. So you kind of just have to get over that hurdle of like, no, you're probably not going to go single-handedly put out a fire by yourself if the house catches on fire. So a lot of people are like, oh, I need to be able to get there in an emergency. No, you don't. What are you going to do? Put the fire out yourself? No, you're going to call 911. So it really just is thinking about it like, well, the process is the same wherever it is. And I do have a couple that are not far from where I live. Like I've got one that's above my office. It's a mixed use building and it's commercial downstairs and a condo upstairs. And we've got another one probably 15 minutes from the house. And we try to make ourselves treat those like they are hundreds of miles away. Otherwise, you're just going to go like want to fiddle with them all the time. So it's just a mindset shift. It's not any harder to call somebody across the country to fix something than it is where you live.
That makes sense. So having a good team in place is like the way to start.
Yeah.
So you kind of you started with your property in Nashville, you started expanding. How do you go about assessing the value of the property now? Like maybe touch on like locally, how would you assess the value and the return on a property? And how would you assess the value or return on a property that maybe you don't know the market and you're not super familiar with that area?
So like if I'm going to go buy a property, like what am I looking at to figure out how much it'll make and stuff?
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. So it depends on where you are in your investing career. So in terms of short-term rentals, There's like pure investment properties, and then there's what I would call a lifestyle asset. A lifestyle asset is, oh, I really want to own a house in this place and I just want to rent it out while we're not using it so that it'll kind of pay for itself. Whereas a true investment property is you don't care where it is. It's not for you. It is for an investment. It is specifically to make money. And you want to buy those first, lifestyle assets later. Get the money properties first, and the fun thing once you have your money figured out. So first, I like to look at, there's a few things that I like to look at in terms of markets. So first, I want to look at tourism. And I really don't, and some of you guys might disagree with me on this. And that's the great thing about real estate investing is there's 1,000 ways to do it. There's no one right way to do it. So I look at vacation markets only. I don't like metro markets, and everybody wants to argue with me about this. And I'm going to buy houses in Dallas. Well, look what just happened in Dallas. I like to avoid areas where a lot of people live. I want it to be a regional, drivable, mature vacation market where the entire economy is dependent on people coming and staying in short-term rentals. The reason for that is because that means that it's really, really unlikely that any regulations will ever be too anti-short-term rental. Like there's always going to be some things like, oh, the county is going to start charging more for this or that because the county is going to get their money too, or the city. But it's very, very unlikely that they're going to say no short-term rentals like they just did in Dallas. So I like regional drivable markets because there's not a lot of primary homeowners and there's not a lot of hotel presence, which those are the two main things that contribute to anti-short-term rental regulations. So I prefer those types of markets. So once I identify a market like that, then I'll kind of start drilling down further. For you guys to, your budget is going to make a big difference. So if you're under 500, there's a certain number of markets that'll work and a certain that won't. Like, so you're probably not going to go buy a single family in Destin, Florida for that budget, but you can buy a condo in Panama City just a few miles down the beach. So your budget, I would start there, is going to determine what vacation market. From there, you always want to make sure, because there are a lot of vacation markets out there that seem like they would be a great idea, like Breckenridge, Colorado, where it's really not a great idea. The regulations are not good. So regardless of the type of market, the next thing you want to do is look at what the regulations are. Don't take Google's word for it. Don't take random Facebook people's word for it that say, oh, I own one here and I've never had a problem with blah, blah, blah. Don't do that. Always just call the county or call the city and say, hey, what are your short-term rental regulations, and get it straight from there. And then I like to look at, in terms of, this is the big one that everybody has differing opinions on, is determining what the income will be. So if I've got my market, I've got my price range, that aligns, the regulations are what I want them to be now, and the tourism is what I want it to be. Now I'm looking at, okay, how much will this property make? So there are several data sources where you can get this information. I like AirDNA is always a good one. Rabu is a good one too. It's free. I like to use it to look at the Price Labs market data as well. And you can kind of use an average of all of those, because they are going to all say different things. And people say, well, which one is right? Well, they all pull data a little bit differently, but there is no like, this is right in short-term rentals. It's always a range. It's never one number. So I like to look at a mix of all of those and kind of figure out, okay, well, I want to buy a 4-bedroom, kind of looks like a 4-bedroom will range between this and this. Then you kind of start looking at the properties. And then what you want to do once you've figured out, well, what, this property looks pretty cool. It's zoned right. I think this is what I want. You want to do what we at the short-term shop call the enemy method in conjunction with any data. So what the enemy method is, well, actually, let me back up first. The data is great. You always want to start with the data. That's the best place to start. But the data can't tell you a lot of things. So the data is just looking at number of bedrooms and how much things are making. It's not going to be able to tell you why there's a difference in what properties are making. So for example, it's not going to be able to tell you that, oh, this property is really, really nice and has beautiful photos and a wonderful listing, and this property is like on the same street, but it's super junky, not taken care of. Data's not going to know that. So you have to use what we call the enemy method in conjunction with that, which is basically just running comps. So you're zooming in on the neighborhood of the house that you're looking at on Airbnb or Vrbo, and you're looking at the other properties that are the same number of bedrooms as yours and kind of trying to figure out where you will fall on that data spectrum. So, if you've got a house next door to you that, you're buying a 4-bedroom, the house next door to you is a 4-bedroom, but it looks like total Texas Chainsaw Massacre house and the paint's peeling off and their windows are broken and nobody's ever renting this, you're going to be able to perform better than what that calendar looks like. But conversely, if you've got another one across the street that's like the most beautiful 4-bedroom ever, as a rooftop pool and comes with a butler and a massage therapist, we're probably not going to be making as much as them. So you kind of are using the comps to figure out where on this data set that you've looked at you'll fall. So data and enemy method.
Data and enemy method. Got it.
Yeah.
And you touched upon at the very beginning of answering the question, you touched upon the recent changes that have been made. You mentioned Dallas, and you mentioned an important thing is also the way legislation is going, especially for certain counties, if we take New York into account and such. So I wanted to ask you, in your opinion, how has the short-term rental market changed in the last 5 years?
Oh yeah, it's changed. It's changed a lot. So it's definitely, it kind of used to be like a blue ocean, if you will, of opportunity. And it still is, but you have to be a little more strategic now. I think back in the early adopter days, people were just, you could buy a house that's like middle of the road and you could have like a hodgepodge of furniture in there that maybe doesn't match or maybe secondhand or whatever. And now, and you can make money doing that. You can make money like having a house that you live in part-time and, I got booked for the weekend. Let me go stay at my mom's house and just leave all my stuff in the house while these people rent it. You can't do that anymore. Now it's very much the people who are succeeding are the people who have always looked at this as running a business. It's not like a cute side hustle, like let me go stay at my mom's when somebody's renting my house. It's not like a funny thing to tell your friends in Carline or whatever. Like, it is a job. It's a business. It is an investment that can be treated as passive on your taxes, but it's not passive. It's running a business. So the people who are treating it like a business and adjusting accordingly are the ones that are staying successful. And we're seeing a lot of the people who were just, buying middle of the road properties that they were just slapping up on Airbnb and making money without really doing any work or, minimal effort. A lot of those people are kind of falling out, selling, complaining on all of the Facebook groups about not making any money when it's very obvious why they're not making any money. And so I think the ones that are going to continue to succeed are the ones that are actually running it like the business that it is, because it's not passive. And anybody who tells you that it is either not telling the truth or not doing their own work.
Fair enough. And since you mentioned this, you obviously look at it as a business and it's your career right now, correct?
Right.
What would you say was the main challenge you have faced in this type of career? Not the music industry one.
Yeah. So this one, I think what a lot of people have a problem with is they think, okay, I'm in this corporate job and I want to get out of it. I'm going to use short-term rentals to do that. That's a really good way to do that. But there is no job where you're going to be able to just like throw your phone out the window and sit on the couch and not have to pay attention to anything for the rest of your life. This is not that. So the hardest part is it is just like any other service industry job. I was a bartender for a long time in college and after college because I graduated in 2009 at like the worst time to be able to get a job ever. So I've done a lot of bartending and service industry jobs in my life, and it's very similar to that. It's dealing with a lot of different personality types, people who they might feel to you like they're being ridiculous, but they don't realize it. So I think a lot of people can get burnt out on the service industry part of this, like the hospitality part, because it's not easy. It can wear on you. Like it's going to interrupt your dinner at some point. And so I think the people who are looking to lay on the couch, or maybe not lay on the couch, maybe just go to the gym all day and never have to do anything again. There is no such thing as passive income. I think that's a big struggle. Yes, it is work. Now, it is work that you can do from the gym or from the bar or from the pool on a raft if you want to. It beats the hell out of sitting at a desk all day, but it is still a business that you have to run. So I think that's something that I've like a little speed bump that I've had to get over is like, my God, why is this person being like this? And you just kind of have to know, like, they don't think they're being weird. It's not personal. They're not asking you or telling you that there's something's broken or a mess because it's a personal attack against you or your house or this investment that you've made, that you've done all this work. They're just telling you, like, you've got to take your emotion out of it and just say, oh yeah, I'll take care of that. Thank you so much for letting me know, and not let it ruin your day.
I think me and Brian have that in sales as well. So
yeah,
we know where you're coming from, definitely.
Oh yeah, and I feel like too. I mean, let's just admit it. Come on, guests can be crazy. They could be kind of nuts, but yeah. I mean, I totally understand where you're coming from. And kind of piggybacking off that, like, you obviously have a team, and I think we got asked this question in the chat a minute ago. Like, mind just talking about what your team looks like the people that help you. Maybe start from like setting up the properties all the way through like actually managing the day-to-day operation.
Okay, so this is Todd's question, right? So reading through that. So 250 properties in 5 years. Okay, 4 doors per month. So these are not all short-term rentals. I have 8 short-term rentals. The rest of them are single family, long-term, and multifamily long-term. So there's really not a ton of setup involved in that. I mean, there is, because we usually buy properties that need rehab. So we do have a few contractors that we work with pretty regularly. And it's kind of a system. Like, they know that on the long terms, they know the paint color that we like to use. We're going to use this builder grade granite because we always put granite in everything. We're going to paint the cabinets a certain color. We're getting all the carpet out of there. We're putting in LVP. They know exactly what we usually do. So that's pretty easy. In terms of the short terms, I try to stick to buying properties that come furnished, which by buying in those regional drivable vacation markets, a lot of times, a lot of the properties in those markets are going to come furnished. Now, they might not always be exactly what you want. You're going to have to replace some things, but you're also not going to have to start completely from scratch. So we're really only setting up about 1 short-term rental a year. So that's a little less crazy. But I mean, there have been times where I've had 9 closings in one day. And that sounds absurd. Like, I was signing closing docs until my hand fell off. So, but you guys also have to remember that 1 long-term rental door is significantly cheaper than 1 short-term rental door. So my short-term rentals they average, between a $500,000 and $1 million purchase price, whereas our single family long-term doors average about $125,000 per door. And our multifamily, I mean, those are only like $80,000 per door. So I can get a 12-unit apartment building for the same price as 1 short-term rental. So it's not as much as it sounds like. It's not as many actual closings as it sounds like.
Still sounds like a lot.
Days, so yeah, 9 in a day sounds pretty good.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah. So that sounds like you're doing pretty well. So, I mean, kind of touching on that. So like, with your team in the Smokies and other places, like, a lot of these markets are pretty saturated with a lot of rentals, or there's just a lot of competition now. So do you see any sort of, changes coming to the way people host, kind of, to set themselves apart? Or what methods have you guys used to set yourselves apart from the other rentals in these really, really competitive areas?
Yeah. So there are a lot of areas that have a lot of rentals. So the saturated is like a word that was not used at all 2 years ago, and now it gets used every day. So you have to think about the reason an area might be, quote, saturated. And by the way, just because an area has a ton of rentals does not necessarily mean that it's saturated, but you have to think about why there are a ton of rentals. Typically, areas that have a ton of rentals have a ton of tourism demand, and the areas that don't have a ton of rentals don't have a ton of tourism demand. It's kind of funny how that works, how all the rentals pop up where the tourism demand is. So what you have to do is you do, like I said, have to run it as a business. You cannot just buy, like when I first started buying, you could buy, I call them grandma cabins. You could buy a total brown grandma cabin that's got weird flowered furniture and green carpet and all that, heart-shaped tubs, and rent it, and it would make money. And you could do that. You can't do that anymore. You do have to update. You can't leave green carpet. That for some reason in all of our mountain markets that we work in, all the 90s cabins have green, or there was like this really specific color of mauve carpet that they all had. You can't leave that stuff in there anymore. You do have to update. And I'm not talking about do a full rehab and spend a lot of money. You got to change out ugly carpet to LVT LVP. You got to change it out to granite countertops. Can't get away with laminate countertops. A lot of times it's as easy as, a lot of times the cabinets will be in fine shape, but they're like that ugly blonde wood. Totally easy to paint. It doesn't take that much to update it and make it nicer, but you cannot just slap up a grandma cabin anymore. And then also optimization, like you have to use a good property management software. You have to use dynamic pricing. You have to be getting in there and kind of tweaking your listing all the time. And I will say that, like, because you guys are on this call right now, you are the cream of the crop. So I've stayed in 3 Airbnbs in the past, probably 2 months. And because I'm in my own little bubble of the short-term shop and our Facebook groups and some other of the big short-term rental Facebook groups, I think because these are who I deal with every day, that everyone is doing this. This is just what short-term rentals are now. And everybody make sure they're super updated. Everybody's working really hard on their listings all the time. Everybody's tracking everything and like making sure that they're optimizing everything. That is not what most people are doing. Like, it is not nearly as hard to set yourself apart as it feels like in this bubble of 84 people who are here because they want to do that. Most hosts out there still don't really care. Like, I'll give you 2 examples. So I stayed in the nicest condo I've ever stayed in my life. It was easily a $2.5 million condo in Montana. They weren't using property management software. And it was a property manager, like a boutique property manager. No property management software, no digital guidebook. They wanted to meet me at the house when I arrived to let me in. And I'm like, no, I'm getting there at like 9:30 at night. My kids are going to be like total jerks because we've been traveling all day. Can you just like give me the code? And they weren't like, this place was so nice. It had heated floors. It had bidets. It was like nice, and not using any kind of optimization tools at all. Conversely, I stayed in a place in, I don't want to say where, in case they're here. I don't want to dox anyone. But I did stay in a place in Colorado where they did not disclose in the listing that they live there and they leave when you rent it. So all their food was like in the cabinets and and there was like a drawer that said owner's food, don't touch in the, why can I not think of the word refrigerator, in the refrigerator. And I was like, man, okay. And I've had just several experiences like that over the past few months. And I'm like, man, this is not reflected. Like the community of people that I'm hearing from all the time, like in our Facebook groups and here and doing these types of Zooms, these people are not the vast majority of what's out there in the short-term rental world. So as long as you guys are working on it and trying hard and tweaking all the time, you're either going to find that you are succeeding and setting yourself apart, or that maybe the property that you have is not the right property, which is something that we see often. So, in the past 2 years, there were so many people that wanted to get involved in investing in short-term rentals that they would take whatever property they could get, even if it wasn't the most ideal, because there were just 1,000 offers on every single property. So to get an offer accepted was like a huge deal. And they would say, that's fine. I know it's a little too far away. I know it's kind of junky, but I'm getting my foot in the door. And maybe that now we're seeing that maybe that was not the best way to go, because it worked for a couple of years, but now that everything's settling down and people, the cream really is kind of rising to the top in terms of the properties that are in the best locations, that do have the best amenities and the best decor and all that.
Gotcha. And if we're setting up the stage, so you took out grandma's rug, you're not leaving your own food and marking it in the Airbnb. You're all set. You have the property, you're good to go. Or you might leave food. I don't know. I wouldn't judge you, but still, that's weird. But you have all of that to set yourself up for success. Now, obviously, you mentioned quite a few tools such as Price Labs, such as AirDNA. So I wanted to know a bit more about what helped you, essentially, which tools helped you expand to the number, which tools helped you stay on top of it.
In terms of analyzing or in terms of managing?
Managing, analyzing, whichever one you prefer. Both would be good to cover.
Yeah. So analyzing, air DNA is still, I think, kind of the gold standard. Rabu's right there too. I use both of those when I'm looking at stuff. I really, since a lot of that didn't exist when I started it really didn't get to be really prevalent until I already had like 5 or 6 of them. So I really just kind of enemy method more than anything. I'm not telling you guys to do that, but this is what I do. Is just looking at the neighbors and checking them out and what are they doing? What do their calendars look like? What's their cleaning fee? How can I be better than them? How can I maybe not be better than them? Like, how is their property better than what I'm looking at? So I do it. I look more that way, using the enemy method, but definitely air DNA, Rabu, great way to go. In terms of managing, if you have got to be using a dynamic pricing tool, that's one of the things that I saw on that $2.5 million condo that I stayed in. They had the exact same price every single day for the rest of the year. I stayed at it like end of spring break time, like end of March, and there was no difference in any price period. So you have to be using that because you're leaving money on the table if you're not. When we switched from manually pricing to using a pricing tool, our income went up 20% because you just can't always know of every little reason that you might be able to raise your prices. Even if you live in the area, sometimes you might not know. Like I live in a vacation area in Florida in Destin, and I don't always know when like the Jeep invasion is. And then all of a sudden you see all these Jeeps everywhere and you could have raised your prices because all these people are like descending upon Destin with their Jeeps. So got to use a pricing tool. Obviously Hospitable is what we use for our property management software, especially for the messaging aspect. And you guys will find that like there's 1,000 property management softwares that you use, and each one will have a different strength. But for us, we find that the messaging is most important. And I think that that's really a strength of Hospitables. The messaging is most important to the guest because you got to make sure that they know everything they could possibly need to know before they even ask it. Like nothing is more disappointing to me as a guest than if I'm getting in really late. I've got 2 tired toddlers, a tired husband who may as well be another toddler. And I'm like, fuck, sorry, I said the F word. I got the wrong kind of coffee. And they have a drip machine and I have Keurig or vice versa. And I didn't even think about this and I didn't know what kind it was. Like there's nothing. And I think everyone who is a coffee drinker is going to feel like that if they forgot to ask and just got what they normally get at home. So you have got to make sure that you're answering all those questions before they can even ask them. And so the messaging is a really important part of that, and setting up your templates and your digital guidebook and all that stuff.
So would you
awesome.
say, providing a positive experience across multiple platforms is tied to having all that in one spot, having it automated, making sure it's as personalized as possible, really?
Yeah. And making sure you answer all the questions before they can even think to ask them.
Yep. Be ahead of the curve. And,
yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes guests will ask you something, even if you told them 5 times.
Yeah.
But I think regarding timing, I think it's good to start getting some audience questions in. So Brian, it's on you.
Yeah. So one of the questions we got earlier today was what are some strategies, Avery, that you're using to optimize your occupancy? So I know you mentioned you're using like some dynamic pricing tools. So is that it? You're just using like some dynamic pricing tools, or do you guys have some other like systems in place to try to optimize your occupancy?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So I'm in 2 types of markets. So I'm in a mountain market, the Smokies, which is about an 80% occupancy throughout the year, or 90% if you got a 1-bedroom. So it's not nearly as seasonal as my beach market. So my beach markets, we use a different strategy because the beach is going to be booked beginning of March to end of September. And that's it. You'll get some here and there in between, but when your season is there. But in terms of the Smokies, so let's talk about that since it's less seasonal. So we keep an eye on things and we let Price Labs do what it does, but we keep an eye because we know that for owning these things for almost 10 years here, that the average lead time is about 5 weeks. So, now we're looking at starting to get September bookings. So we're really paying attention to that. But if we've got like in any of our properties there, if we're not all the way booked for July yet, it's time to, it's July in 2 days. So we need to figure some things out, maybe drop some prices, maybe lower some minimum night stays in July to make sure that gets booked. And I think right now, most of ours, except for one, we've got one that's a little light, but we've just got 1 and 2 day holds in July for right now. So you know what, that's fine with us. So we're looking what's 5 weeks out now is probably like first, second week of August. So if we're not getting August, bookings kind of rolling in pretty steadily in the next 2 weeks, then we're going to start looking at making some pricing changes, like manually outside of what Price Labs is doing. So we're always kind of working off of a 5 week lead time. We keep our calendars open 1 year in advance. So we've played around with changing that here and there, and we keep all of our prices. The further out the date is, the higher the price, because typically if somebody's going to book that far in advance, they're usually going to be willing to pay more because they've got something important going on. So as the time gets closer, we'll lower it. But again, we mostly let Price Labs do its thing, set the minimum and the maximum. And then for the beach markets, it's a little bit different because these are like, our beach houses are bigger, so 3 bedrooms and up. We've got a lot of 1 bedrooms in the Smokies. So people are typically booking those in January, February, maybe March, once they're done with spring break. And we want to have all of our June done by March and all of our July done by like April, May. And typically that just kind of happens in those markets because, like I said, this is like where people go to the beach. It's not really a weekend market at all. It's typically Saturday to Saturday bookings in the summertime. So once we get to May, if there are any holes in June and July that are a week long, typically, then we'll start to lower those minimum night stays so that we can get those booked. But ideally, further out, we're looking for those 7-day bookings. We're not going to set a 7-day minimum night stay, but maybe like a 5. And then as time gets closer in the beach markets, lowering that minimum night stay and lowering the prices a little bit to make sure it gets booked.
That makes sense. That's a good strategy.
Yeah. Well, and I think one thing that a lot of people make a mistake with is, especially people who bought at the height of things, which I have a property that I bought at the height of all prices, at the height of everything. So I'm right there with you. I'm not one of those people who's like, oh, I bought everything before it was $200,000. Some of it I did, but not all of it. People who bought at the height who are like unwilling to go below a certain price because they've averaged it out and found, well, I need to make X amount per night to break even. And they've got their break even number. Sometimes the biggest mistake you can make is to let it sit empty. There are, of course, exceptions to the rule. You don't want to rent to, somebody who's going to tear your house up because you lowered it too much, but you've got to be realistic about where your pricing should be. If we're getting, closing in on some dates and it's a little too close, I see a lot of people who are like, no, I refuse to go below X amount per night. And that's okay. But is it worth it to have 5, 6, 7 nights in a month sitting empty just because you won't go below that? What if you had gone $10 below that? What if you'd gone $20 below that? And, it doesn't, if you go below that price, it's not guaranteeing like your house is going to get torn up or whatever story you've heard somebody say. It's not always worth letting it sit empty out of principle that you're not going to go lower. It's better to get some money than no money, even if it's not as much money as you want. I mean, how many jobs have we all had that isn't as much money as we'd like to be making, but you don't not take the job because it's less than you want.
Got it. That makes sense. So you're saying like 3 to 5 weeks, you'll try to make as many changes as you can. So you're that 80 to 90% booked in the mountains anyway.
Yeah, in the high season. I mean, once you get to the low, I think a lot of people get real like every May and every September, we expect to see in our Facebook group, everybody freaking out because, oh my God, I'm not getting booked. And we're like, May is slow, guys. So September, because you're right between spring break, you're right between summer, then you're right between summer and fall break. So just everybody calm down. So it's really important to not lose sight of what the seasonality of your market is so that you're not like beating your head against the wall in the off season, trying to figure out why you're not 80% booked. It's not going to happen. So it's important to keep that, to keep sight of what your seasonality is as well.
Awesome. And I definitely, like, from my sales calls, I usually get asked a bunch of questions like, hey, we're not getting booked right now. Is this because of Hospitable? It's probably because of seasonality, not us.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm gonna ask you the question that Stephanie Sun has asked us in the chat. So, how were you able to get the capital to acquire so many properties?
Great question. So again, I'm going to start my sentence with the mistake that I see most people make and swing it back around to what I've done. So when you buy one property, so when you're buying your first property, you're doing a lot of things to save up that money. So I had my husband and I on a $20 a day budget every single day. I didn't buy lipstick at Sephora for like 2 years. We did not go out to eat. We did go out to bars occasionally. But like we saved and we penny pinched, and I had a shitty car that had $150 a month payment on it. Like, who's ever heard of a car payment that low? And we just bootstrapped it. So a lot of people, once they buy that first property, they think that they can stop bootstrapping and just use that income to buy the next one. You can't do that. You have to continue doing the thing that helped you save for the first one, and then add that income from the first one to that. So now you've got not twice as much necessarily, but you've got your bootstrapping plus your other income, so you can get the next one faster. And then you're continuing to bootstrap, and now you have the income from your first one and your second one, and you keep snowballing. So you can't stop the bootstrapping, and you cannot start living off of the money that you're making from your properties. I have still, to this day, never spent a dollar that I have made on a real estate investment on anything other than my next real estate investment. I have not said, you know what, we need a break. Let's go to Mexico. We use income from I do sell real estate, so we have other income, but in terms of our actual real estate investments, we don't spend any money from that on anything but more real estate. And we still take income from our other income streams to add to that. So don't live off of the income that you're making from your properties, and you have to continue to bootstrap. There are, of course, other ways you can pull equity out of things or get a HELOC or whatever, maybe borrow from your 401k. We've done that. I hadn't been in the workforce long enough to have really much of a 401k anyway. I had like $10,000 in there. So I'm like, well, I'll just cash this out. We did do a HELOC on our primary home for our second property, which was, I think maybe we pulled out like 15,000. It wasn't much at all. And immediately paid that back. But, times are a little different now than when we did that. And I have never cash out refied. I have never done another HELOC since that first one, because I don't want to get over leveraged. I don't want you guys to get in a situation, and I see investors do it all. I see influencers do it and tell people to do it. So if you take nothing else away from this, just remember that I said this: don't pull so much equity out of your properties that are cash flowing that then they stop cash flowing just for the sake of you to be able to buy more properties. Keep the ones that are cash flowing, and just, if you don't over leverage yourself. I'll leave it there. I've seen people post about, pulling $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 out of a house. And I'm like, there's no way that thing is still making money. There's no way, just so they can go buy 3 or 4 more. But then you're left with this property that isn't making money. And why'd you buy that in the first place? So don't over leverage yourself with the refinancing. I don't like that. I think that's very irresponsible advice. I mean, it's okay. Maybe if you've got $300,000 worth of equity, maybe pull out 50 or something reasonable. Just don't leverage yourself to where you've got no equity, and then you're going and buying high interest loans on other things. Like, just, it's okay. It's allowed to take time. This is not get rich quick in real estate. Real estate is get rich slow, even in short term.
Very valuable advice, especially going after influencers with get rich quick. And just before Brian asks you another question, girl to girl, you're buying in Sephora now, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Okay, sweet. Okay.
Yeah. I think about every time I go through Sephora and I've got my basket full of crap. I'm like, remember when you couldn't even, there was a time when you weren't allowed to buy, you wouldn't allow yourself to buy lipstick, but now, yeah, I have 27 shades of almost exactly the same color.
I feel that. Enough about makeup. Brian, go ahead.
Yeah, I have zero input on the makeup portion. However, Heather asked a great question. She first says that you are her hero. So there you go. You got another fan. She asked, are there any tips for identifying a good cleaner or a GC, I'm guessing general contractor, quickly upon entering a new market?
Okay. So definitely every single market now has market specific short-term rental Facebook groups. If they don't have short-term rental, I'm sure they have just a real estate investing in general Facebook group. Like I'm in Omaha right now. Omaha has a huge one. It's like a really random place to whatever. Anyway, go in the local Facebook groups, ask questions, and ask every single person who gives you a referral if they've used that person specifically. Because what you're going to find, there's a lot of people who are going to be referring their friend or their cousin or whatever. You want to only contact the people who the people referring them have actually used them for that task, has actually hired them. That's for cleaners. Cleaners also, you want to make sure it's really, for me, I found more of a making sure we communicate well thing and that we're on the same page than actually what they're doing in the property. Obviously, you want to make sure that they're cleaning, but if it's somebody that you need to ask to make a change and they like can't handle that and they're going to be pissed off at you because you said, hey, the guest said you forgot to wipe out inside the microwave. Can you hit that next time? And they're going to be somebody that gets all like prickly about that, then maybe that's not the right person. So communication is really most important, communication styles with the cleaners. General contractors, I have personally been screwed by a contractor before. And what you know, they're always going to take long. Every single one of them, even the good ones, are going to take longer than they initially said. Use the same method in making sure that you're only hiring people that you're getting actual references from people who have hired them. And make sure that they are willing to give you a quote up front that they will let you buy the materials. So you may not know this, and it's totally common practice. Like I have people who work for me doing my long terms that if they need to go to Lowe's, Lowe's is calling me and saying, hey, they're buying this, this, and this. Can we put it on your tab? Yes. Okay. Because where you can really get in trouble is, they're going and buying what was actually $300 of materials and charging you $3,000 in materials. So if they need to be okay with letting you buy the materials. And then they're charging you for labor, or maybe charging you like a little bit more that's discussed up front for the materials and them going to get them. I want to see now quotes for each phase of the job, because where I've gotten screwed is, okay, yeah, it's going to be this much. You want to put this backsplash in, paint these cabinets, put this countertop in, put this tile. We're at 30 grand or something. And then next thing you know, they're done and they're handing me a bill for 90 grand. And I'm like, this is not by any stretch of the imagination what we discussed. Well, the tile guy had to do this, this, and this, and they had to redo that because what you chose was blah, blah, blah. You need it at every stage. They're not allowed to change anything. If somebody has a hard time or something goes wrong and they have to do it a different way, they need to be okay with coming to you first. Hey, we ran into this problem. It's going to cost this much to get around that problem. And just make sure they're willing to quote you or invoice you as you go and not just wait till the end so they can surprise you with a bunch of crap that they had to do different that you had no idea they had to do different.
So referrals and oversight, that's what we're talking about. Like get referrals and make sure that you kind of know what everybody's doing at every stage.
Yeah. And you can do that without being there, videos, pictures, send your cleaner to get pictures. And it doesn't have to be, I'm kind of making it sound more adversarial than it has to be because it's happened to me one time. But, the next people, if you say, hey, I'm on a tight budget, I want to make sure that you get paid well for what you're doing, but I need to keep an eye on X, Y, and Z, they're going to be fine with that.
Sounds good. Vera, I think you had a question from the audience picked out.
Yeah, I really want to hear this one because it's I think it will affect a lot of people. So for you, Avery, what does a well-performing short-term rental produce in net profit annually?
You really can't answer that without knowing the size, how much it costs, where it is, things like that. I have a studio cabin in the Smokies that makes $60,000 a year. I only owe 70 or 80 grand on that. So that gets me, I would say, an over 60% profit. But I mean, nowadays, if I'm buying something new, I'm pretty much, if it's going to net 30-35% of the gross, that works for me.
But again, it's literally, it comes down to, as you said previously multiple times, it comes down to the property itself, the market, and it's not just one factor. It's quite a few factors.
Yeah, because if a property makes 100,000, well, that's great. But did it cost you $1 million to make 100,000, or did it cost you 300,000 to make 100,000? You know, there's a lot of different variables there.
Yeah, absolutely. Brian, I think you picked one.
Yeah. So I think Jean had a question. It's very like location specific, but I think, we can kind of pick generic places. So she wanted to know, she says, I have a 3-bed STR and studio in Long Beach, California, and she's looking for another one in Hershey or Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. How do I determine which is the better market? So she's kind of looking, but kind of comparing. So if you're looking at two similar markets, how do you compare and ultimately choose which place you're going to go with?
So if there's two really close, then it's going to come down to the deal itself. So, and what's available at the time. So I tell our clients this all the time, like, if you want, you're welcome to work with our agents in as many markets simultaneously as you want to. And it's going to come down to, where the best deal pops up first. So, maybe, a better deal pops up in one or the other. I would say look in both. It's okay to do that. You don't have to like say, oh, I really don't want to let go of Hershey, but I'm going to. Look in both of them and just keep an eye out in both, because you never know, if you're only looking in one, a great one might pop up in the other one and you miss it.
Very true. Great advice.
I think we have time to squeeze one more in real quick. So let's go with Demetrius, who said, you said you let Price Labs do its thing. Does that mean that you don't include your own pricing strategy around their software?
We do. So it's kind of hard if you're new, but we've owned long enough to know, like, okay, I don't think I really want to go below this price. I don't think you want to set ceilings on it too, because sometimes it is, technology. So it is going to be wrong sometimes. And sometimes it might try to price you wildly high. But so we just kind of keep an eye on it, keep an eye on our enemies and see what they're getting, just to make sure that while it is doing its job, that we're staying in line with the rest of the market.
Awesome. So just to slowly start wrapping it up, first of all, obviously, big thanks to Avery. Amazing advice, actually actionable advice and genuine advice. So that's always wanted. And that's something that a lot of people need to hear. But most importantly, none of us would be here without the audience. So thank you guys so much for joining us and also being very active with the questions. I think we all enjoy that a lot. And also, if you enjoyed this event, you can stay tuned for Hospitable Masterclass and must-know tips for midterm rentals with Wires. This is Women Invest in Real Estate. And this event will be on July 18th at 3 a.m. Pacific time. So again, July 18th at 3 a.m. Pacific time. And we'll include the registration link in our follow-up email and in the YouTube description as well. Now, for now, I think that will be all from us. Again, thanks everyone for joining, but especially Avery, we're having a bit of a preference here. And yeah, thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Avery. We appreciate it.
Amazing. Have a lovely day, all of you.
Thanks.